think
record.
Right. Okay. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Apologies, I'm on this like tiny screen. Maybe it doesn't look like a tiny screen to you. So if anyone needs to leave early, or you listen to this and think somebody else, a friend or a partner or a colleague would like to listen, it will be recorded and you're very free to share that. If you haven't met me before, my name is Rachel Beck. I'm a former primary school teacher, and 21 years ago, I founded Educating Matters when my first child was born. I personally specialise in topics relating to educating and raising children, and integrating work and family. And I also very recently launched an online parenting course, which is basically 30 years of kind of research and working with parents and children, and basically all the strategies I think that children really need to thrive. So if you are a parent, feel free to check that out. And Educating Matters work globally with lots of different organisations on a whole range of topics relating to DEI, so things like allyship, neurodiversity, mental health and well-being, LGBTQ+, carers. And before we start, I need to make an apology because I was really excited about inviting these three women. They were the first ones that popped into my head when I thought about this theme of loneliness, all for different reasons. Then I, put it all out there. And then Sherry beautifully pointed out, we have 4 white women on our panel, which is not the most diverse representation. So I apologise for that. And I just, these wonderful ladies were just generally the first people that I thought of. So Gwen and Suzanne are both in-house speakers for Educating Matters, and Sherry works at Page Group, and she is one of our really highly valued corporate clients. But I would love to invite each of you to introduce yourself. So Sherry, carpool karaoke, would you like to go ahead first?
I know. This is definitely a first for me, doing it from my car. So because I'm on my iPad as well, I couldn't even blur my background, but it's lovely to be part of the panel. We will all have different views, I know, even if we are all white women. But Sherry Hughes, UK DE&I director for Page Group, and we're a global recruitment business and been looking at everything DE&I related for 10 years now, which is quite a lot in this space. And been working with Rachel in Educating Matters for 6 years, I think. I think it's 6. Yeah, sounds about right. I'm a mother of 2 as well. I've got 2 girls, so very much in that real juggle of family and home life.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Gwen.
Hi, I'm Gwen Jones. I'm one of the in-house speakers for Educating Matters. I started my career out as a special education teacher, actually, after getting my bachelor's degree in psychology. And I taught for 9 years working with children who were labeled emotionally disturbed and behavior disordered. Luckily, we're doing a little bit better by them now. But after 9 years of teaching, I realized that I wasn't so into the reading and the math side of things, but I was really into relationships. So how do children and parents relate to each other? How do we relate to ourselves? How do we relate to our partners and to each other in the workplace and the greater world around us? And so I retrained as a parenting coach, as a psychotherapist, a relationship therapist. And through that work, discovered this amazing space Rachel introduced me to through Educating Matters of workplace well-being, and really found my passion. So I work a lot in the D&I space. Allyship is my passion more than anything else. I like to talk about neurodiversity quite a bit because I'm a neurodivergent individual. I've taught neurodivergent individuals, and I have a house full of them with my 4 children. 3 out of 4 are neurodivergent. So my one neurotypical daughter is always kind of like, how am I supposed to be the typical one? But we make it work. But I really love talking about health and well-being, and how can we make this place, in this workplace that we all are a part of, how can we make it better? I mean, if we're spending all this time here, either virtually or in person, how can we make it better and rewarding, and a place that we can fill our cups rather than empty them out when we're done? So yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Gwen. And Suzanne.
Hi everyone, really nice to be here. So I'm Suzanne. I'm an International Coach Federation certified coach, and in my work I support people with caring responsibilities, so people are looking after someone else in their family or a friend, through coaching, through group work, and through webinars. And as so webinars. So I'm one of the speakers working with Rachel at Educating Matters. It's been a real delight to connect with people across the world. It's been really exciting. And as co-founder of Mobilise, which is an online organisation supporting unpaid carers, I'm working with local authorities, NHS and employers to really, first of all, identify and then support unpaid carers across the UK. I have my own lived experience of caring. My husband, Matt, who's just bought me a coffee, I forgot to tell him I was on a webinar. My husband, Matt, was diagnosed with Parkinson's just a year after we got married at the age of 31. So clearly some time ago now. But together as a family, we're also supporting my parents-in-law through some challenging health and ageing issues, with one in a care home and another one just diagnosed with Parkinson's. So we're juggling all of that. It's not my favourite word, juggling. And we've got 2 girls as well, so going through teenage years and all of that at the same time. But they've been really super, actually. I think life's been very different for them, having a parent at home with kind of this long-term condition and going through things like brain surgery and stuff. So yeah, that's me. I'm really looking forward to sort of talking about our topic today.
Thank you, Suzanne. So the theme for Mental Health Awareness Week is loneliness, and I wanted to take the opportunity to really kind of look at some varied perspectives on this topic. During the depths of lockdown, we were of course cut off physically from each other, and even though we're drifting back to some sense of normality, I personally feel that I'm really not back to my old levels of socially connecting and even chatting to people as much as I used to on the phone and making arrangements to see friends. And according to a Mental Health Foundation longitudinal study, almost a quarter of adults in the UK have felt lonely. I'd be quite interested if you could share in the chat. It's quite hard for me to see it, so you're going to see my finger pointing around. But how would you actually define loneliness? Anyone, any thoughts on that? So I saw a definition by a dean of psychology in East London who said, loneliness is best defined as an intense sense of perceived isolation. Now, obviously, just because you are alone, that doesn't mean you are lonely. And you can feel lonely when you're surrounded by people. And I think the antidote to loneliness really is meaningful connection. And that could be with friends, family, colleagues, pets, even total strangers. A lot of reports and research recently in the workplace has found that building close connections with colleagues is the most important factor in determining job satisfaction, and it's also going to impact on productivity and well-being. So we've got another poll question, Gwen, if you wouldn't mind launching that, which is really whether you think loneliness has become a greater issue since the start of the pandemic, whether that's for yourself or colleagues or, just kind of what you've observed. And the way this is going to work is I've kind of got a question for each panelist, drawing on their expertise and experience. So I'm going to ask each of them their question, and then we're going to have time at the end for you to have an opportunity to ask us questions. Whilst we're chatting, in the past, we've had a lot of these cross-company panel discussions, and one of my favourite bits is like the side chat that goes on. So as the speakers are speaking, if something pops into your head, something resonates, you want to share an experience, we really all learn from each other. So please feel free to just chat amongst yourselves. You can do that anonymously or share it with everyone. So Gwen, I'd like to start with you because you've obviously got this background as an organisational psychologist and psychotherapist, and whether it's working with individuals in your clinic or supporting, thousands of employees in large organisations through your work with Educating Matters. Can you set the scene and talk us through how we can better understand loneliness and its impact on an individual's mental health? Now, I know you could speak for a whole day on this. So
yeah, I could talk for hours about this. Yeah. Rachel knows she has to reel me in sometimes because I have a tendency to get very passionate about topics that matter to me. But yeah, it's such a big question, but I think it's helpful to remember that loneliness is not the same thing as being alone. I remember during the pandemic where I had 4 children, I was homeschooling during lockdown and business and school and stuff. And I was thinking, I am jealous of people who are lonely and I am jealous of people who are bored. But that's not really true, because loneliness is a very uncomfortable state. It's a state of mind. It's not a state of being. Like, it's not a lack of people around me. Loneliness has a distinct lack of human connection, and that can cause distress or dis-ease in the mind because a person really desires that connection, but can't seem to find it. And I mean, there's a lot of bias in our minds when it comes out to loneliness. Most people picture like the older person waiting in the window for their relatives to come visit them. And now, don't get me wrong, this is accurate and certainly a part of loneliness. But what about the person who started a new job a year and a half ago and hasn't met any of his colleagues in person and is yet to find that kind of, that work bestie that you have a tendency to get if you're lucky, and hasn't been able to connect with anyone on a deeper level other than what tasks have you completed today? Or what about that quiet child who flies under the radar and they kind of walk along the perimeter of the playground because they don't have anyone to play with and they don't want to get made fun of for being alone, but they're just so lonely? Or that teenager who eats alone and spends all their breaks in the library because they don't know how to connect. They want to connect, but there's just that missing piece to be able to find those people who should be in their tribe. I mean, we have to look beyond our previous conceptions of loneliness. And this can be really difficult because lonely people are usually very quiet. They're not connecting even in an aggressive way sometimes. And so they're hard to spot. We have to be on the lookout for them. We need to not only look for what's there, but also kind of what's not there. And we add to this the new dimension of COVID and social isolation, social distancing. Many people came out of lockdowns and social distancing having lost connections with other people that used to matter, either because they've changed jobs or they've moved. And also just not feeling a sense of belonging anymore, which is incredibly important. And it's hard to explain to some people how you can be in a room full of people that but feel so alone for lack of connection and just not know how to take the steps to find it. I mean, as human beings, we have physiological reactions to human connections, right? So we release feel-good hormones when we laugh or physically connect through handshakes and hugs. I mean, even our blood sugar and blood pressure regulate easier when we're in a connected space. And this is part of the reason that loneliness can feel so viscerally painful. I mean, listen, I've seen it in individuals. I've seen it in relationship breakdowns that have come into the room behind me, in working with teams and corporates and families, in my own circle of friends and family. But here's the trick. The cure for loneliness is connection. So if we can take small steps to build a connection, we can find our way out of it. And all connection is a shared experience. It's shared joy. It's shared laughter, shared annoyance, pick an emotion, anything that you can share with somebody else. When it's shared, that's connection. So how do we do this, right? Well, in the office, it's never, it's about sharing a feeling in less formal circumstances, right? And never underestimate the power of shared complaining. Sometimes that's the first time we can make that connection, because complaining about the weather is a British staple that is a great way to connect with other people, as long as it's not all that you do, right? But in relationships, it's not about this idea of we need to go on a holiday or we need to go on a spa break, although those are great. Please tell my husband I need both of those. But it's about, making a meal together at the same time, or about reminiscing about how you got together in the first place, or about having that hug last just a little bit longer so that you feel that connection. For children, it's about peer support, play dates, finding even just one friend that they can connect to. And for teens, it's more about like ninja parenting, because they don't want our involvement, but they really want our involvement. And so it's about, what are your interests? What are your passions? And how do we find other people with those same interests and get you connected? What we have to remember most importantly is going from loneliness to not feeling lonely is a long game of incremental steps and small moments that lead to connection. And loneliness disappears without you even realizing it, because you've made these simple steps and you've made these connections. So that's what we kind of need to work towards.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, we've got already some questions coming, so we can have an opportunity to explore that a little bit further. So, excuse me. So Sherry, I've worked with you quite a number of years to support families at Page, and I've really seen, not only with that network but the others, how much effort you put into support employees during the depths of lockdown, but more importantly now, we've got this kind of more hybrid model of working, and how can we continue to enable people to feel really connected? Like, what tips could you share, whether we're talking about part of a broader DEI strategy or really smaller, everyday practical things that organizations can do to help employees feel more connected? I mean, just yesterday I had my first in-person meeting for ages at Centrica, and there was a woman who started 10 months ago, and I saw her bump into someone she's seen a million times on Zoom over 10 months, and it's the first time they'd actually ever seen each other in person, and it is a different like connection and energy. So how can we, like, give us some ideas of what we can do about this in the workplace?
Oh, do you know, as I was going through all of this last night, and I was thinking, okay, well, what am I going to specifically highlight? And then I was trying to think that this still changes for us on a regular basis. So, you know, what we were doing in the pandemic worked because everybody was at home. So you were already kind of in a uniform state of how you were going to check in with everybody because everybody was in a similar situation. But then, of course, the office spaces started to open again, and some people would come in and some people wouldn't. And, you know, typically it was kind of the same groups of people who either were or weren't. So then where was your interaction with people who were different? Because I really liked what you said, Gwen, about meaningful connections. Meaningful connections is when you are perhaps experiencing something a little bit different, and that might be with people who are like you, and you've got that similarity connection actually, and understanding one another and being in a similar space, but then also people who are going through something very different. And so I just want to make sure, I suppose I point out a couple of things. Check-ins, without doubt, are the most vital part, and how that would work for you. You need to do it in a group setting because you need to be able to bring that team element, but equally that shouldn't be to the detriment of one-to-ones, because there'll be certain things people will say in a one-to-one environment that they won't in a group setting. And also you need to keep variety in regards to how and why you are getting together. So I keep hearing this conversation around, well, flexible working, hybrid working, and how wonderful it is, and it is. But how do you make sure that you don't lose the collaboration and the physical contact because people are actually finding it much more convenient to balance work and life by being at home? And if you start mandating when people need to be in office, well, then is that really flexible working? And I go round in circles with this all the time. And primarily it comes down to choice, but also you need to give people a reason to want to go into the office. And there was a recent experience of somebody who left our organisation because she was actually loving the remote working and the fact that actually she didn't have to go in. But then what she didn't realise is she was feeling increasingly disconnected with her team, and actually then she went somewhere else because she just felt like she'd fallen out of love with us. So there's lots of things to try and kind of balance, and what will work at one time will change a week later or a month later. So I think it's important to know that just because you've got something that might be working at the moment, don't assume that that's going to work forever. So some of the key things I've got are, yes, check-ins. Make sure you understand the choices people want to make and why they want to make them, and how you could therefore accommodate that with everybody else. Don't always try and fix things. Make sure you listen first. Sometimes people just want to be heard rather than have everybody rushing to a solution. Staying connected. I mean, Gwen, everything you were saying, I was like, this is just so important at finding out what works for you. And when you think of an environment of psychological safety, and that is whether you are physically with somebody or not, do you find yourself in a psychologically safe space with your colleagues and within your work environment? And I heard a really brilliant acronym recently, which was the FIT model, which I hadn't heard before, which was feedback, inclusion, and transparency, which translated basically means, am I seen, am I heard, and am I understood? And if you've got that, if you have got people truly feeling like their choices matter, you know, that their voice matters, and that they are being listened to and understood, and that their preferences or values are respected and accommodated, then actually that's the starting point to feeling connected, because you are feeling seen, heard, and understood. So irrelevant of whether or not you have got, you know, situations that might mean you prefer to be on your own at times, whether you're introverted. I know there's a question about introversion and loneliness and so on. It's like, but are you seen, heard and understood by people who you interact with? And clearly that's in the workplace. And then there's been a lot of neuroscience, neuroscientific research that's done around in the workplace, when do people thrive? And actually what I didn't realize is, I'm going to make sure I get this right, we're most fulfilled and with the strongest sense of purpose when we are helping someone else. Now that's in the workplace. I appreciate there's lots around, you know, you have to love yourself and value yourself before you can, you know, you can't, you can't fill for an empty cup or whatever it is. But actually in the workspace, and clearly that's what we're talking about today, how do you make sure everybody feels like they are fulfilling their sense of purpose? Then that is about recognizing what those triggers are when they're thriving. And that is generally about the interaction and how they are benefiting someone else. So I would perhaps ask you all to have a little think about that. You know, when you've got people who are thriving and they have a dip, what was it that was happening in that time that they were thriving that triggered that really great behavior? You know, was it a great piece of work? Was it an interaction with a completely different team or department or person? Because we are in a world, we're overinformed, we're overstimulated, we're overbusy, we're over comparing, and our minds are just at breaking point. And when you feel like that, you lose the ability to connect. So just to wrap up, some of the things that we're doing is we've got a really great well-being strategy, and we're really mindful of people respond to different things. You know, some people will meditate, some people will run, some people will cook, some people will cry, some people will do whatever. But there is one thing that stays consistent, I think, with everybody, is everybody needs to find the person they're going to talk to. And it may surprise you who that is. It might be a neighbor you don't know that well. It might be a neighbor who's 3 decades older than you. It might be a work colleague. It might be your partner. It might be your whoever. You get my point. And if you don't find that person to talk to, then who will ever listen and who will ever see, hear and understand you? And I just think that we need to, going back to the first thing I said, is we need to check in and we need to make sure other people check in. So we've got things like, yes, mental health first aiders. I know some of these will be really obvious. EAP, we actually have a workplace adjustment tool via a company called Clear Talents, which is all about optimizing your work environment. And that is from a wellbeing perspective, as well as perhaps any adjustments you might need for any conditions or neurodiversity. We are teaching our people different breathing practices. So we are doing Wellness Wednesdays. We're making sure that we are doing different things to bring our people together, but also to take a break from work. You know, burnout is a really real thing. And our health and wellbeing survey has been saying our people don't feel they can take breaks because of, you know, work overwhelm and so on. So we're
Hi, is that
I think you're frozen, Sherry. I'm so sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, she'll hopefully come back. I mean, Sherry made some absolutely fantastic points, and whilst I was listening, I was thinking basically what she's describing is any relationship. Like we're always saying, Gwen and I, as parent educators, that all any child really wants from anyone is to be seen, heard and understood. You're a relationship therapist. That's what people want from their partners, people want from family members. I mean, it's kind of pretty much the same whichever scenario or situation you're in. And it leads nicely into Suzanne, because what Sherry was saying about feeling most fulfilled when you're helping someone else. Now, I know Suzanne has to do a huge amount of that as a parent, a carer for her husband, a carer for her parents-in-law. And you've spent, Suzanne, you know, an awfully long time, almost 2 decades, with those caring responsibilities. And I can only imagine that carers might have that extra propensity to experience loneliness, especially if you're amongst colleagues who don't have caring responsibilities and maybe have a little bit more independence and freedom. So what practical advice would you give to share with individual carers, and more broadly, perhaps thinking about how organisations can really support employees who are carers? And those people with caring responsibilities may be the ones who are more likely to prefer working from home, so don't have that same opportunity for physical connection. So it's also like, from your perspective on the other side as a carer, how organizations, how you think they can help colleagues to feel more connected if they're not physically present at work. Made it quite a long question. What I mean.
We'll pick up all of that, absolutely. And absolutely that, being a carer kind of puts you at the heart of it. But it's not just my experience. You then hang out with other carers and see what they're experiencing, which I think is kind of, that builds that kind of sense. It's not just about what Suzanne would like. It's that real sense of what lots of people are feeling. As Gwen said, that loneliness, it can look different. It's not just about whether you're with or not with people. And for carers, I think there's two really, there's some really specific reasons why loneliness might be more common. And then there might be more situations, and it's really something to tackle. They really need to be aware of that and tackle it. So just being aware that you might be more likely to be lonely because of your caring role can be a great first step. So it can be things like feeling isolated physically because our caring roles give us maybe less time or just energy to connect with others in a meaningful way. Or maybe being physically restricted, needing to be at home, needing to be available for that phone call, or traveling to care. Lots of people who are caring for parents spend their weekends going up and down motorways, trying to sort things out and keep on top of things, or they're driving home a couple of times during the week and things. So just spending more time kind of in that caring situation. And for a lot of people through the coronavirus situation, actually, because they've been shielding, coming out of that, feeling quite anxious about meeting up with people. That's a big step. So they're kind of battling with all of that. And also just that emotional loneliness, feeling unconnected to others, even though we might be surrounded by people. So sometimes we can feel like we've got little in common, or that others just wouldn't get it, is what I hear quite often. That's why people quite often head to a carer support group to chat to others that get it. We hear conversations about holidays, relaxing weekends, nights out. And it just feels like another world sometimes. Can be quite nice to listen to that as well. Sometimes it's a nice break to hear what other people are doing, so don't stop. But and also, like, perhaps people are moaning about relationships and they may seem very different to the challenges that we have, or my mum's really interfering. Oh, my mum's got dementia and I'd love her to be interfering. That would be nice. So we might feel a bit outside of things, and it can just be also to kind of low mood, anxiety, low self-esteem. And sometimes it's just that we're hanging out with the wrong people that aren't great for us as well. Sometimes there's a little bit of that. So loneliness and isolation is very real for carers. My advice for carers, well, first of all, you probably don't see yourself as a carer. Those caring roles creep up on us. We don't notice them. It's not as distinct as having a baby that, hopefully we know when it's coming and there's some planning. So important to just take stock and notice the impact it's having on us. And it can be a difficult topic to open up about, because quite often it's someone else's stuff. For me to talk to my friends about Matt's care needs, that's a difficult one because they know him. So sometimes finding the right person to be able to talk to, being in that safe environment is really important. But initial things, letting your GP know, both from just opening up that conversation, but also so it's on your record, and that can sort of lead to additional support. They kind of really recognise your role. Telling your employer, and that might mean letting HR know, speaking to your line manager, but also just starting to open up that conversation with colleagues, because chances are there's somebody else with similar experiences that will start to open that up. And it really takes bravery to start that, but that really kind of triggers some great things. And connect with support. And like Sherry was saying, having that person that you feel really comfortable talking to, it might be a best friend, it might be a work colleague, it might be a professional, it might be a complete stranger on the internet. Whatever works for you, having that real safe space where you can connect with someone and really talk about the things that you need to talk about, and someone that gets it, someone that will listen. Exactly as Sherry said, someone that's not just going to dive in with a solution. So if, as a carer, if you're finding that connection difficult, your friends just kind of don't get it, they've not had this great training and listening perhaps, and they just talk about, oh, that happened to me as well. That's great, enjoy that for what it is, but do seek out that right kind of deep depth conversation, call it that being rock, someone who can be rock for you, who can really listen well, and give you that space to think things through. So important. And then, so that's carers. How can organizations really support employees who are carers? And exactly that, they might be preferring to work from home. I think with the whole transition back to the office, carers are probably hanging on as tight as they can. They're still worried about infection, you know, that the people they're caring for may have very, you know, be very vulnerable, may not have been able to be vaccinated because of their conditions and things like that. So the situation might be a little bit different. So a bit of understanding just about that. Give us a bit of time, we're getting there. But also don't make that assumption. Some carers cannot wait to get out of the house. Work is their absolute break and is like a holiday for them. So, you know, don't lock them in their homes either. If they need to come back to work sooner, having that conversation is really important. It can feel like a break. But yeah, it's true. Many people working from home can be easier. And, you know, we've learned over the pandemic, we've gained time. So this caring role may have subtly slipped in because it replaced our commuting time. Oh, and we're doing that for caring now. So how do we get back out of that one? We're keeping vulnerable loved ones safe from infection, but also that peace of mind of knowing we're to hand. Not all caring roles require us to give hands-on care. We may be actually even less distracted if we're working from home and we're not worrying about the person we care for. So just being aware of those individual situations, because I know, you know, employers might, well, you're caring for your mum. What are you doing during the day? I hope you'll be working. They probably are. They're just feeling more relaxed because they know mum is okay. And what else can employers do? So policies, yes, there's some basics that can be put in place in policies, but more important is culture. That's what really makes a difference here. I speak to a lot of carers whose employer has the policies in place, but it's not really happening in real life. And they still feel guilty about asking for extra leave or about asking for flexibility because they're worried about how it impacts their colleagues. So policy isn't enough. It's really got to work with the culture of your organisation. So as Sherry was saying, all those great things that are in place, those things will be great for carers. No need to do anything different. Just keep doing that stuff. It's brilliant. You know, that'd be really inclusive for carers, but making sure it's available if you can't make it into the office, making sure it feels, you know, that anyone can join in these things. But also quite often, not everyone understands what we mean by people with caring roles and the word carer. And we can see them as being other people, about being a distinct group of people. But unlike other kind of inclusion areas, this is a sort of transition place we might come through, and it could be any one of us at any time. So maybe seeing it more as being all of us rather than a separate group of people can be helpful. When people share their stories, that's really powerful. That says a lot more than anything else, that it's okay to talk about this, it's okay to share this. And if senior people can lead the way, that can really make a difference. But it can be anybody. It's really great to get that representation from all parts of an organisation, not just kind of a particular section of the organisation. Conversation is key for carers. That's the thing, that connection is really key. Space to work through what would work best for them. You know, some carers, some organisations have a thing called a wellbeing passport. So rather than having to kind of convince everyone involved in every project you're involved in, you've kind of got that wellbeing passport that's set up what's going to work for you, and that kind of goes with you around jobs and around different projects that you might be involved in. So those can be really helpful as well. But above all, it is about culture, and it's about how people actually behave and the human connections that we make. So when you're not physically at work, so informal chats, those check-ins, whether they're structured or whether they're just off the peg, and just remembering we're not having that time in the little coffee area while the kettle boils, having a quick chat, or while we're taking our coat off. So recreating that is important. And I had one thought, you know, sometimes there's a bit of a working lunch, everyone will come in like, no, it's fine, you can join virtually, it's okay. But what about the working lunch bit? Could we send them a delivery or something, just to sort of make people feel a bit special and included as well? And just kind of that remembering that, you know, we thought about you and it matters. You know, we're not just thinking, oh, it's great for you, you're at home, we had to come into the office. But colleagues have a role to play as well. And the key one is when you ask someone how they are. Quite often people ask me how Matt is. And I think that's really lovely that people remember his name and remember the situation. They'll remember a detail, you know, when he was going through brain surgery and things, people checking in on me. But the question, and how are you, is a really good follow-up question. Just make sure you're kind of making that time to that, because quite often you've replaced the how are you with how is your person you're caring for, and they've missed out on that bit. And that's the thing that carers always say. And things like, you know, if we're going to do work drinks after work and things like that, what would be more inclusive of not just carers, but other people that aren't working in the office or that have to go away? Are there other options? Are there lunchtime things and other kind of ways of doing stuff and being together? Powerful networks, so things like if you've got a Yammer discussion board and things like that, having that ongoing safe space conversation carers networks. It's been great now. You know, we've done so many webinars where I think more people have attended than in a face-to-face event, because you can kind of lurk in the background, see if this is for you, and it's a great way of sort of starting those things. So lots of things, but essentially work with the culture of your organisation, see what's already there, and make sure that's highlighted and that carers are aware. It doesn't necessarily need a whole big project overhaul. Things can sort of happen quite quickly. But also remembering, you know, that carers, you know, it can sound like we're feeling very sorry for carers here, but, you know, these are people that are quite often in the prime of their careers. If you think in your 40s and 50s as your parents aging, that's the classic thing, that sandwich generation. Your kids are growing up, and oh no, I've got to look at my parents. Where are those people going? You know, if they can't stay in the workplace, you're going to lose some really valuable people as well. Sorry, on my hobby horse there. But, you know, just, you know, recognizing that it's not just about, oh, they're special and need help, it's they're really valuable to our organization, and that's why we want to look after them. Yeah, I think, that's me. I landed somewhere.
And thanks, there's loads in there. Gwen, can I just check, because you're hosting it, that we can still see Sherry, because I saw a message from her, or enable.
Yep, she's back on. We're good.
Oh, brilliant. Okay.
I'm here.
Hello, brilliant. So one of the things I just keep hearing from everyone is creating that space for conversations, and the gift of listening to a colleague, a friend, a family member is probably the most powerful thing you can do. And there are a few, there's lots of good questions. One of them, well, actually, it's the last one, and it's linked to that. It says, if people are very private, and all three of you are looking at this from different perspectives, and perhaps they even see, you know, talking or sharing your challenges as a sign of weakness, how can you get someone to open up? Or going back to a question in the beginning, when someone is maybe more of an introvert rather than, you know, lonely. So any thoughts, like whether it's in the workplace or, you know, from more of that psychologist perspective, how do we get people to open up if they don't really want to?
So there's two pieces there. One is the introvert extrovert thing, right? And sometimes people don't understand what that means. So it's, if you can be an introvert and still be very outgoing, you can be an extrovert and be shy. It's just about, where do you get your energy? So for me, I'm like the ultimate extrovert. If I'm in a crowd full of people, I'm come out, I'm jazzed, I'm feeling really good. For my husband, who's the ultimate introvert, he comes out of a crowd full of people. It's like, I feel like I just ran a marathon, but he needs to find his energy internally, whereas I find mine externally. So those are kind of personality characteristics that are actually separate. But when it comes to how do I have these conversations, and people like to be private, you know, we have to remember that you don't go to somebody that you've never met before and say, you know, you seem rather depressed to me and I'd like to talk to you. But they'll be like, ooh, excuse me, that's very private, that's very personal. Never underestimate the power of superficial conversations. You know, where did you get your shoes? Oh, where did you get your lunch? That looks really good. Or, oh, that meeting took forever, didn't it? You know, things like that, all these little conversations, that's where we start. You don't start with the big stuff, because it is personal and it is private. And somebody may never divulge the fact that they are, you know, have a depression diagnosis or an anxiety diagnosis, or that they're a carer, or that they're neurodivergent. But still having those connections and having those conversations is how you're going to build that relationship up, so that the loneliness starts to dissipate. It doesn't, no one's asking you to be a psychotherapist here. We're just asking you to be friendly and open, and just notice people, because there's nothing worse than thinking that, you know, I disappear, I don't exist, nobody sees me. So just letting somebody know that they're seen, even if you're complimenting them on their extremely rude coffee mug that has a very, you know, offensive pun on it, if my mother ever saw it, kind of a thing, but I think it's hilarious. You know, things like that. Just having those moments where you're like, oh, you know, oh, Sherry, I love those dots on your wall behind you. That's a really clever idea. You know, anything like that is how we start building those connections.
Okay, thank you. Sherry, there's one here that's maybe from you, from kind of that corporate perspective.
But Rachel, Sherry's had to drop off again, but I'd love to hear what the question is.
Okay. Oh, and also I think, well, both you and Suzanne can probably think about this. So, you know, all of us, because of the work we do, we are, you know, supportive people. And I find when I give talks, people that I barely know will share, you know, very personal things. So how do you navigate, particularly if it's a colleague at work, where they're offloading quite a lot on the other person. So first of all, that has sometimes an impact on you and you don't know what to do with that information. And then this question says, in extreme situations where one person is doing that like constantly, especially if everything they're offloading is all negative, maybe you think people end up wanting to avoid them, and that kind of leads to more loneliness. So while we're saying let's have conversations, what happens if people feel by doing that other people back off more?
Yeah, this is a really common thing in the carer space, actually, that when peer support starts and people start that some people just get in the habit, I need to rant, I need to offload. And, you know, there's different approaches. You know, yes, you can, if you're on the receiving end of that, you can skill up around that. You can learn around how to look after yourself in that space, how to take time to kind of not let it soak into you and be burdened by someone else's things, and how to kind of go in with those really helpful questions that will kind of let, you know, if someone's going on and on and on, it's probably because they don't feel that they've been heard. And so sometimes it's just kind of about recognizing that and you know, wondering what's going on there. But it also might be about signposting, you know, making sure that you've got to hand the kind of resources that might be helpful. And there is so much now, not, you know, people, Samaritans might jump to mind for people, and that can seem quite extreme. You don't need to be in an extreme situation to talk to Samaritans, but there are lots of other kind of options as well that might be kind of chat groups, or you can text people back and forth. My daughter was amazing at this. At the age of 13, she had a friend who was kind of just offloading on her all the time. And she went and found these other spaces where her friend could go. And then she also went and found some space for her where she could talk to an adult about this and, you know, unpick it. At the time, she felt it was hard to come to me because her friend was going through some very kind of intimate stuff and she wasn't sure she wanted to talk to me about it yet. But she went and found a space to do that. I just think that's amazing. We can all learn from that a little bit as well. But that's where sometimes facilitated group work can be really helpful as well, that it's not all sitting on one individual. So notice when someone's doing it, and notice if they're doing it with you is probably a good place to start.
Okay, thank you. Have we got a Sherry back or not? Because I can't see anything on my little phone.
Yes, back. I think I need to make her a co-host again. Here we go.
Right. There was a question, I'm not sure whether someone is asking, so a question from Kin about becoming a mental health first aider, and whether you are, you know, in a corporate setting, because if you are, you could probably just ask whoever's responsible for well-being or someone in HR, but I don't know if you were asking more broadly. But Sherry, you touched on the role that mental health first aiders play.
Yeah, so that's quite new for us. We've had mental health champions since we started our mental health kind of inclusion strategy back in 2016. And that was a fairly brief training. We've upgraded that just this year to, mental health champion training was a day. We've upgraded it this year to mental health first aider training, which is a 2-day course done by Mental Health First Aid England. And actually the really good bit about it, and I know there was a question about the person who's taking all the information in, the listener, how do they care for themselves? And actually this has been something that's really good within Mental Health First Aid England, is all of the people who complete the course are then given a support structure and help for themselves, so they don't just take it all in and then have to take all of that on as well as their own stuff. So of course it comes with a cost, and it is a time consuming time commitment, should I say, from everybody who takes part. But interestingly, the difference in the people who've completed the course so far versus our mental health champs, they are just infinitely more comfortable in how to handle the conversations, and they're not experts, you know, they're still not specialists within mental health, but they just feel that bit more comfortable in how to support, spot signs. You know, clearly signposting is a big part of it, but I think it just adds to the confidence for that population.
Okay. And I think Gwen posted a question in the chat. By the way, if anyone else has questions, continue to ask them. But Gwen, you posted one that you were asking everyone else, but I'd like to throw it back at you or any of the panel, which is how would you say you recognise if someone really is feeling that loneliness and isolation? Because you don't want to, you know, make assumptions just because they're living alone, or because they're older and they can't, you know, physically move around as much, or like, what are some of the signs that if they're not openly telling you, we should be looking out for?
Yeah, and sometimes you have to consider things like neurodivergence. So for example, my autistic son, who's 18, he wants 3 friends and that's it. Like he doesn't want connections with a lot of different people. He wants to know that he can talk to people, that his voice can be heard, that he can get answers to his questions. But as far as those deep connections, it overwhelms him to have more than those kind of 3 friends right now. And that's fine. That's okay for him. For me, I want like 90 friends in a room at a time, and we can rotate even more people in there if you want. Like I want to connect to the world and I want to connect to everybody. And there's space in between those 2 extremes. But what we really want to look for is, does someone look like, you kind of look for those physiological removals. It's like I said, a lot of the time it's looking for what's not there as opposed to what's there. So the person who kind of raises their hand, somebody else gets called on and they do the whole like that, oh, I'm never gonna get called on. Nobody ever calls on me. I don't get to say my thing. Somebody who's never putting their voice forward, and it's not necessarily from anxiety, but it's just because they don't know how to connect. So, you know, as people managers, we can kind of look down at our team and say, okay, are we having conversations? Are we having chit chats? I saw one really interesting example was a tech company that when they went into lockdown, their well-being scores plummeted and they couldn't figure out exactly what it was because it went really, really low. And silly as it is, it came down to they had like a meme of the week competition, and they weren't doing that in lockdown because they didn't have it up on their screen where they would share these memes and they'd vote on who got the meme of the week kind of a thing. And all they had to do was open up a WhatsApp group of meme of the week. And then their well-being scores went through the roof. It was amazing. So, but is somebody not participating in that? Is somebody pulling themselves away? Does someone, you know, not because of caring responsibilities or because of preference, are they not feeling included in coffee times, break times? And are they not feeling seen and making sure that their voice gets heard? So that's kind of what I look for loneliness. It's not so much what they're doing, it's where they're pulling back. It's where they're not there. Because thinking about isolation, it's like, you've got this bubble around you that nobody can see through and you can't get through. And so we're trying to kind of penetrate that bubble so that you can have those connections.
Okay. So does anyone have in the audience, I don't know because I'm seeing on a tiny screen, did anyone see any further questions that I missed?
There's a really good comment at the end. It's from Tegan. It says, I found that past experiences can also hinder how people ask for help or want to talk. Someone who's been dismissed a lot will probably be more reluctant to start those conversations, in the same way that someone who has had to deal with their struggles on their own will probably be more reluctant to join the group conversations and understand the benefit of them.
Yeah. That's a really, really good point. So if I kind of ask each of you, you know, we've touched on lots of different areas, but what is like the one main takeaway to really try to this antidote to loneliness? What would you say? Maybe we'll start with Sherry.
In case I cut off again and you lose me.
Yeah.
Good choice. The biggest thing for me is keep asking, because, you know, you're not, I forget who said it, but one said, you're not going to go up to someone and say hi and they're going to share everything instantly. They've got to feel that psychological safety that you're asking because you care. And therefore, if you care, you're prepared to hear the answer. And I think we've just got to keep asking. And I would honestly say, even though we've really focused on mental health probably since 2016, each year we get that bit more into just having a positive mental health culture, which is the open discussion, more people sharing. So for the first time this week, in all of our comms for this week, we had one of our exec board speak out. Up until then, we'd had kind of middle management, director level. We'd never had one of our senior leaders, and it was one of the most powerful statements, because it shows that no one's invincible. It shows that actually everybody needs help from time to time, and you just don't know when somebody's going to be ready to ask for help and therefore accept it. So you've just got to keep asking, and you've got to keep asking in different ways, allow different opportunities for people to access resources. And never assume you've got it cracked, because this is just going to keep going.
Brilliant, thank you. Suzanne?
Yeah, I think that there's been a lot, you know, we talk a lot about talking and listening, but really at the heart of that, what we're talking about is connection. It's not, it's more, goes beyond, it starts with conversation, but goes into connection. But also remembering that connection, particularly that early stage connection, might start with something that's not a conversation. It might be just coming alongside someone. It might be doing a group activity together. You're all stuffing envelopes together or something and busy working away. It might be making someone a cup of tea, dropping something on their desk if they're there in the office, or a kind of thoughtful note or present or little check-in or something like that, sort of, or a funny gif or a meme of the week, exactly. Those sorts of things. And as that goes back to what Gwen was saying about things start small and it starts to alleviate it. But yeah, connection is sometimes more than just talking and listening.
Thank you. Gwen.
Yeah, and I just like to say, coming on for that incremental kind of steps that you take, if you're someone who's lonely, it is so scary to take that first step, because loneliness often comes as somebody said in the chat, oftentimes it comes from rejection, it comes from fear, it comes from past either big trauma or little trauma. So taking that first step can be something as simple as, hey, can I borrow your pen? Or can you help me with something? People love to show up as experts. So asking somebody to help you with something, even if you don't need the help, creates that connection. Be willing to practice it with the barista at Starbucks, practice it here and there. Just having that little extra conversation, that little extra comment, start small, and then just know that it just starts to snowball. And before you know it, the loneliness is gone, and you didn't even notice that it disappeared because it's simply no longer present. So understand that those small incremental steps are huge for you, but then it's also a huge payoff when you're willing to go forward and try it. So yeah.
Absolutely. And David in the chat has raised obviously an amazing point, because emotional intelligence is one of my favorite topics of conversation. But really, being aware of how you show up at work and in your personal lives, and showing that empathy and compassion. And this concept of psychological safety, it's also about creating that space where you feel that you can ask questions, you can admit mistakes, you can openly share experiences, as Sherry was talking about before. And I think one of, I suppose from my concluding remarks is, human connection is everybody's job. It is a fundamental part of nurturing a great place to work and a more resilient society in general. So if anybody has any further questions, you can always get in touch with us in the future. We will be sharing a recording of this, so feel free, if you think it's helpful for your workplace or anyone you know individually, to share it with them. And we are always creating new content and new topics, and we were inspired by this theme. So Gwen's delivering some talks specifically on the topic of loneliness as well for us. And Suzanne's going to be really busy next month because it's Carers Week. But do reach out if there's anything we can help you with further. And if you are a parent, check out the support that I provide around parenting as well. But thank you so much for joining. And you as an audience really make these events for your willingness to share and really open up in the chat. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.